Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session on public consultation, bringing communities and transport users on board. My name is Michael Portilla. I'm your moderator today, and I come from the United Kingdom, a country in which public consultation is perhaps taken to extremes, so that it seems to take a very long time to implement any public project, particularly maybe a transport project. And when I was a minister in the United Kingdom government, I was full of admiration for the French, who seem to be able to build railways or nuclear power stations relatively quickly. And I put it to one of my French ministerial colleagues that there must be some difference in our national cultures. And my French colleague explained to me, he said, in France, when we drain the swamp, we do not consult the frogs, which I thought was indeed an interesting illustration of national cultural differences. And I will wonder during the course of today's session whether really there is much that can be learned from one country to another, or whether this really is a matter of dominant national cultures, in particular political cultures, maybe particularly what is the view of the relationship between the state and the citizen. In the United Kingdom, I suppose the view is that the state is the servant of the citizen. In other places, it might be seen as the citizen's duty to conform to the overall interests of the state. I'll also be interested to know really whether this business of public consultation, is this really a matter of ticking boxes, or is it a matter of making sure that things can be moved forward as quickly as possible, or is it really a consultation in the more thoroughgoing sense that there may be changes that are made to a project as a result of the public consultation? Would you alter the route of a road or of a railway after public consultation? Would you alter the frequency of a tram service or of a bus service following public consultation? We have a marvellous panel today. From my extreme right, as it were, we've got João Raminhos Tomé from the European Investment Bank, who stepped in at short notice to join the panel today, so we thank him very much indeed. Then to his left, we've got Holger Dalkman, who's the director of a project called Embark from the World Resources Institute. He'll explain more about that in a moment. Sitting more or less in the middle is Glyn Jones. He's the managing director of Luton Airport in the United Kingdom, one of 5 airports that serve London, with, I might say, only 6 runways between them. Then we've got Carlos Mia Iteran. He's from ProTram, from the National Bank for Public Works in Mexico. And on my immediate right, Andreas Scheuer, who is the Parliamentary Secretary of State from the Federal Ministry of Transport here in Germany. And he is now going to be our first speaker, and he will be speaking in German, and he'll be using the red microphone. No, he won't. He'll be speaking from the lectern.
Und wird vom Podium sprechen. Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think if we look at yesterday, and I mean, after all, we heard a lot about funding of infrastructure yesterday. And I think public consultation is a topic which is very high on our agenda. The way in which we handle infrastructure implementation, that's decisive for all of us. In 2012, Germany published a manual for best practice in terms of public consultation in transport projects. They designed guidelines for best practice in that field, public consultation. And the aspect of public consultation has been high on our agenda for quite some time. There are many examples where infrastructure projects led to rallies, demonstrations of the various stakeholders. That covered highway development, major railway bridges, major stations, up until smaller parking lots for our trucks and lorries and lorry drivers. So the protests are rife, and many citizens in Germany expect this public consultation. We catered to this requirement, and we wanted to make sure that we get an early, timely, consistent public consultation. Planning right in Germany is a special product from which many other states benefit from our experience. It contains many rules and regulations on public consultation. All planning levels are called upon, especially when it comes to zoning processes, permits, specific permits which are issued. So public consultation is really mandatory here. Having said this, we would welcome more headway in the field of citizens' participation. It's a very in-shop, closed-shop hearings of experts. Many citizens shy away from participating in these expert meetings, and this is why we need to embark upon new strategies. I feel that we can allay these conflicts if we ensure early involvement of the citizens with good public political openness, proactive approach, purposeful action. And we feel that this manual for citizen participation, public consultation, defines this toolkit, very hands-on topics in order to ensure public consultation when it comes to these projects. Of course, we're on the learning curve when it comes to every major infrastructure project. We can always make a good job better. And I feel that the main challenges for public consultations are the following. We need to ensure early citizens' participation, consistent citizens' participation, open and transparent public consultation, citizens' consultation, and citizens need to have the impression that they are proactively involved in these projects and that there's really a tangible improvement, that they make a difference. For the government, it's very often a cumbersome undertaking. Time is of the essence. Time is critical. These public consultations are time-consuming. Makes our life more difficult. In addition to the regular planning processes, procedures, and at the end of the day, these public consultations also drive up the costs because we need to strike compromises. Having said this, we're living in a time and age where we have a very mature society, very sophisticated public polity, and where, don't get me wrong, where there is a certain saturation. Of course, you need to think about noise abatement, have discussions here, environmental concern, climate protection, CO2 carbon footprint, and for us as transport politicians, this is a major challenge because it is our job to implement this infrastructure. There are many citizens which are annoyed with us if we don't implement these infrastructure projects rightly. And this is why we need to be careful here when it comes to the public consultation bodies, that they are not just show organizations which make public vociferous statements, and that the silent majority refrains from these exercises and doesn't become involved. So it's always a trade-off. But we feel that our manual for public consultation defines an excellent toolkit which will help us handle infrastructure projects in the future in a better way and deliver a better track record when it comes to using the available resources from the Ministry of Finance and the Budget Committee from the German Parliament. So this is a new toolkit, it's a new political dialogue in terms of handling infrastructure projects in Germany. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. So you've got a new manual, and you've referred to the need to consult more, but you've also referred to the silent majority. In other words, the people who are out there who want to have a new transport project. They may be quite distant from the transport project, but they may benefit from the transport project. So how do you actually achieve the balance between these two, between the local people who will be very active in making their complaints clear and the people who have a more general interest in improved infrastructure? How do you make that balance? And I mean, let me be specific. How long is it reasonable to indulge in this consultation before you build, say, a road or a railway line?
Ich mache keinen Hehl daraus, dass einige... some of the projects here that you see on paper here on a desk, well, you would say, look, this is implementable, isn't it? All of a sudden, you have one grassroots movement here, local, that drags this process on, where then this project starts to fail. But you have to take these local interests seriously. I mean, we have many corridors in Germany. We have trans-European corridors. Freight has increased significantly here. And of course, there's interest also of the economy, of the commuters, people that pass by these locations. But dialogue alone, honest discussion, where the citizens say, look, we have now achieved that there is a security fence, that there's some noise insulating walls, that there's maybe some rerouting of the line here. And we have worked hard on our own project, say. And where is then some solidarity here also with the project here? That is the desire, but it is not making implementing projects easier. Over the last years, many things have developed here. Where there is that basic idea is, look, transport is something that's loud and smells, and we don't need this. But we need then to say, as the government, look, we need transport. And you, citizen, need it as well, because your milk will not come from the skies here, and your car will not be beamed from Asia here. You need a ship, you need a vessel, you need a train, you need a truck to transport all this stuff to you, and so we have to be very open in our communication with the citizens, you know.
Or because you wanted to consult more, or because you wanted to make faster progress with projects?
Ich glaube, dass der Werkzeugkasten dort.
I mean, the toolkit here I'm referring to is this will maybe we will not lose time, but it may be more expensive because we have to make concessions. But many of the consultations, public consultation, have brought about faster compromise. So, and maybe that even there has been, lengthy court proceedings that dragged on for 5, 6, 7 years are no longer necessary because there was some agreement in the first place. So, with this toolkit, I think we have made a good compromise and reaching out to the citizens and also improve the transport policy this way.
Yes, indeed. Now we're going to deal with a range of situations and cultures and communities, and Holger Dalkmann is now going to, I think, shift our focus away from a highly developed country, Germany, to a more global perspective. I remind you that he's from EMBARC, which is part of the World Resources Institute. Just keep speaking and they'll switch you on. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Michael, and good morning, and good morning, everybody. Really moving from Germany to completely different parts of the world, as Michael introduced myself, working for a sustainable transport program where we in fact working in 6 countries around the world, in Latin America, in Mexico, in Brazil, in Turkey, India, China. And when we talk about public consultation, and I would like to share here a little bit of a different perspective on that topic, we see 2 main differences. One is on the political economy, and the second on scale, when we think about it, so what are the challenges and what are the needed investments in transportation infrastructure. Just to start with the question of scale we're talking about. In India, in the next 20 years, we will have 200 million more people living in cities. In China, we're talking about 300 million. To give you a specific example, the city of Ahmedabad in India currently has 3 million, had 1993 million, in 2010 6 million, and in 2040 we're talking about 13 million. So when it also comes to public consultation, most of the people actually currently are either not born or not live in these cities yet. And the Asian Development Bank estimates just for Asia alone we need about $2.5 trillion of investment in transportation infrastructure. So here we're talking also about a complete different type of scale, which also has influence also on the consultation. But also we had discussions yesterday, particularly also with the development banks. The challenge is here also the capacity, the sheer capacity also on planning, on having people the technical capacity to implement these projects. So here we even not talking about public consultation here. So there's already a lack and a challenge of capacity here. And so when it comes to consultation, we have to take also this into account, how much capacity is in fact there to run these processes. Second is the political economy. We don't have lots of legislations in Mexico, Brazil, India on consultation. So I'd like to share with you three key trends and observation where public consultation is in fact helpful. First of all, it's about information. So this is really the minimum of public consultation. That's what we're facing in a lot of countries where we're working in, and which is absolutely vital. So in Mexico City, we help with the city on setting up a bus rapid transit system, and particularly this is now going through the city center. And in the past, people were even not informed. So here, even working with the city and having hearings just to inform, that helped with the acceptance, and that helped also with the success of the project. In contrast, in Delhi, the opposite. No information, no work with the media, no acceptance, and that led to, in fact, also to failure of these large-scale projects. So here, again, we're not really talking a lot about consultation, but even at the first step, having the information is vital and moving in that direction. Secondly, we have more and more voluntary activities that people in cities, in specific settlements themselves, that we want our settlements to have a safer environment. We want to have more space also for walking. We want to reduce the traffic, and we want to have livable communities. And here, from India to Mexico, there are in fact good examples where, partly driven by business and partly by local communities on a bottom-up scale, but again also not from a legal-driven perspective, but more from a voluntary perspective. And we see here some progress. And third is that we see in some cities around the world, from Durban to Rosario in Argentina, some more innovative ways of working with citizens on a vision of the future city. So here, setting up working groups, how the city can look like, and with that also getting a buy-in. So in short, we have a complete different situation from a legal-driven, from a lot of experience in Germany, to more information, voluntary activities, and also some initial ideas on how to bring in the public at an early stage when it comes to the vision of the city.
Very, very interesting, and of course extremely different from what we were just hearing from the Minister, from Andreas, about Germany. So, I mean, let's take the examples of China and India. Apart from the work that you're doing to encourage more consultation, what is the feeling at governmental level? Do the governments feel any obligation to improve their public consultation, to change their legislation, or do they feel really that they're in an ideal situation because they can build as much infrastructure as they like without anybody delaying them with consultations or protests or anything else?
Well, two things, one on China and one on India, in fact. The Chinese government, and we know we have here a complete different governance system, in fact, recognized to better inform the public is in fact has also value. So we see currently, particularly driven also from environmental concerns around air quality, around water, that here, not informing the public, there's more and more social unrest. So here, informing the public more and showing them also this has a benefit for your city, for your environment. I think that's again, we're talking more about information than consultation, but we see certainly a trend in China around that, and also more transparency and more openness. We can now, on air quality in Beijing, the information is available on every smartphone. So there's more pressure and more pressure for the government. In India, we're going a different way. There's a lot of access, in fact, to court. There are not many legal requirements on consultation, but with a strong democracy, a lot of people also have access to court. So here, by again better information, by going, currently India is setting up a new urban investment program. We're talking about $30 billion for cities, recognizing we make that at an early stage transparent in which direction we want to go, and also the cities to inform at an early stage to say, well, these are the plans.
Thank you. Very, very interesting, and I think also encouraging, actually. So we've just had a mention of Mexico, so why don't we call on Carlos Miri Terán from ProTram, National Bank for Public Works, Mexico, to talk to us next.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I think in the case of Mexico, I will talk to you about two examples. One is to build a road to bypass a city. We have a toll roads program in Mexico. And also the case of another program who is going to promote the mass transit reorganization and to promote projects for mass transit in the main cities. So these two programs, they have we have a manual that it requires for the roads to have the right-of-way liberalized as a prerequisite to go and make a tender in order to build the roads with public-private schemes. And the main challenge for this program is to liberalize the right-of-way. And in that case, you have to first convince all the people that you are going to buy their land or expropriate their land. And in some cases, you even have to leave the project. You cannot do the project. And in the other cases, it takes you a lot of time, but it's better to give enough time to agree with all the human settlements around the right-of-way before you dare to start the project, because if you start the project, you might delay the construction time so much that the cost increases several millions, and you have to change your scheme of the public-private scheme to allow the private investors to recover later their investment. So better do it first, and if you take more time, it's better in order to have a financial viability of the project and, of course, a social viability. In this case of this bypass project, the political aspect is, do you want to bypass the city or you want to build a second level in the road that passes? So you have to also to deal with that at the political level, which benefits more the city, or you want to give more benefits to the long distance travelers. And in the urban aspects, we are working with Embark in a program called ProTram, and we have focused on on the 30 main cities of Mexico, which are more than 500,000 inhabitants. And we developed one requisite. We work with a manual for social impact and environmental impact. So if you want to have financial support from the bank, you have first to have a plan for social management and for environmental management, and you have to have like a social impact evaluation and a plan to work with the people so that your project can be socially viable. And we had an example that it was a very good project with a BRT, Bus Rapid Transit project in Guadalajara. They had already one in place, and they wanted to build the second one. But the first one was, for the perspective of the users, was very good. But for the perspective of the non-users, the people didn't like it because it takes one of the lines and out of the service for the cars, and also it has a bypass in every station. So it was like very rude with the automobiles, and also it impacted the people on around the avenue, and the feeder trunk was affecting also the users. So it became politically unviable, and the next corridor wasn't impossible to develop. So the project stopped there, and then you have to look for another technological options. So we think that it's better to solve first the social impact than start with the projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. These examples are rather dramatic examples for, I think, for those of us who come from European countries where we assume that eventually the problem will be solved. I mean, we have systems, for example, of compulsory purchase. So under our parliamentary system, eventually you will be able to buy the land that you need. It's under the law that you're able to do that. Of course, you'd have to pay a fair price and so on. But I'm quite surprised that you say that in some cases, I think one of your examples was a highway, that sometimes you have to abandon the project. So can you tell us a bit more about that? How does that come about?
Even in the case of the airport of Mexico City,
yeah,
we had to abandon the location previously defined, because the people didn't want to move from their places, and it was like a manifestations in the, and even they kidnapped police, and they started fighting against the government.
So it gets quite violent.
Yes, it was impossible to do the airport in the site that it was defined. And the problem is that they didn't take into account the people, and the price they were going to pay to them was very low, because the law says that it has to be evaluated by a federal institution, and the value didn't take into account the opportunity cost, didn't take into account that they didn't want to sell, that they lived there for all their life. So the approach wasn't adequate, and we had to abandon the project in the case of the airport of Mexico City, and also in the case of this bypass. The bypass location was affecting very old urban settlements that they didn't want to sell, they didn't want to move, they didn't want to, and so it became a political issue. So the different parties they supported the people, and so the project wasn't abandoned. So instead of doing a bypass of the city, it will be a flyover over the road.
Very dramatic examples of what happens if the public consultation has got wrong. So now, João Raminhos Tomé, please.
Thank you very much. As you know, the European Investment Bank is the European Union arm, financing arm, and we do lots of projects inside the European Union, most of them, and also lots of them outside the European Union. As far as public consultation is concerned, we follow the regulations of the EU, where public consultations have to be carried out in all our infrastructure projects. And inside the EU, this is mandatory, and each member state has got their own regulations and legislation that mirror the EU regulations. Outside the EU, where I work primarily as in my function, we try to have these regulations in substance done and accepted by the different countries, so that the projects that we appraise, they have the public consultation in line with the regulations of the EU. Sometimes it's more easy, sometimes it's more difficult, depends on the country where we operate. But in substance, we can say that most of the projects, all of them, they follow in substance the procedures, and public consultations are done in all the projects. But what I want to bring to this forum is something that I particularly have been doing in many of the projects I'm doing myself outside the EU, where not only the public consultation, the traditional and formal public consultation, which is part of the environmental impact assessment, is carried out, and this has to be done at the different steps of the procedure, with the shortfalls that we discussed here. Some of the times, most of the times, the general public is not there, minorities are represented, and we face this problem that are very aggressive in some occasions. But that's another story, maybe we can discuss later. What I try to bring to the projects I'm managing is another dimension of public consultation, that is to bring along, during the process of the execution of the feasibility studies, sort of meetings with different stakeholders that have a say in the final product of the project. Because what we want is that the project, when it's terminated at feasibility, at design, is already fully or somehow blessed and accepted by the public concerned. So I give you some examples in North Africa and the Middle East, where I have projects in Tunisia and in Jordan, where we provided grant money to the authorities to perform feasibilities, comprehensive feasibilities and design studies. Of course, during the execution of the studies, there was the different steps of the EIA that we all know, with different steps of public consultation, but I added another layer of public consultation, whereby during the execution of the study, the consultant, together with the different persons involved, ministries, regional governments, and sometimes also private sector, would attend what we called steering committee meetings or technical meetings, where the work of the consultant was being presented, was being discussed, and was being, I can say, desiccated to the level of acceptance by the different parties when the project was still ongoing. We had very successful discussions on two major projects in Tunisia and also one in Jordan, and they were big. One is the ring road of Tunis, and the other is a major motorway network to southwest of Tunisia, where the projects are almost completed. And at this time, we can say that all of them has passed through these public consultations as part of the IA, which are the normal ones, but also they passed through other informal or steering committee meetings where the designs and alignments were decided and were discussed and somehow were blessed by the different parties that were in those meetings. So now we are sure that when we reach this final stage of designs and tender for works and construction, we might have problems of expropriation. We still have them, but we can avoid them because people are much more well informed about what is going to happen in those projects. And I think these are some examples I would like to bring because it gives a different dimension of the traditional way of doing designs and feasibilities, which I faced in my career of many years, that the consultant comes along, does the study, and produces after 2 years, gives the study to the client, and nobody knows what is there, and we need to discuss it again. Here we avoid this by having step by step. Usually we have 3 or 4 or 5 different meetings, interim meetings, at different milestones of the project. So I think that's what I would like to bring, and then I stop now and I wait for questions. Thank you.
João, that's very interesting. I'm struck that you, obviously within the European Union, you work to European Union regulations, but then you say when you work outside the European Union, you try to take the European Union spirit or European Union regulations with you and bring them into the place where you're working. So, for example, in Tunisia and Jordan, what is the reaction to introducing European Union standards? Is there resistance from the governments to those standards? And how does the public react? Is the public happy to work to a kind of European Union standard? Is the cultural difference important?
Actually, in Tunisia, we were, with the Arab Spring Revolution, the acceptance of what the procedures that we proposed were tremendous. Public participation was sometimes exaggerated, but people were very much interested because for the first time in the country, they were doing a proper EIA public consultation. Because before, I worked before the Arab Spring Revolution, what happened was that the so-called public consultation was not a public consultation. It was just, in French, the les élus, the gouverneurs, the directors that would meet and discuss the project, but the public was never involved. So what we brought to these two projects for the first time in Tunisia, and I can say this because it's good to know that the European Investment Bank was at forefront of this, to introduce this, in substance, the procedures of the EU with public consultations in a format that we more or less do the same as in EU. Very well accepted. No resistance from the public officials, from the government. On the contrary, they were very happy to have this on board because the mentality has changed also in the country at the public political level. And the public participated immensely on those consultations. It gave a lot of insight and inputs into the projects. Even they somehow, with their comments, we had to change some of the alignments and some things, because were not foreseen by the engineers. But by consulting the public, we saw that some of the options and some of the ideas that public had were better than what the engineers had thought, even though they had different alternatives. But this was what I can say in a nutshell. Yes, very well received by the public and by the political level.
Thank you very much. Our last panellist is Glyn Jones. He's from Luton Airport in the United Kingdom, and I think he's probably going to tell us about a very specific example of public consultation around an airport that has been increasing its passenger numbers.
Yes, thanks, Michael. I speak more as a grubby practitioner than as a policymaker. The practice involved is live. For the last 15 months and probably, in fact, almost certainly at least, for the next 4 months, we'll be involved in attempting to acquire consent to take the capacity of the airport up by about 2/3 more, which is a material change. It's the UK's 5th largest airport, so it's a material project, but it's not a huge project. How have we approached it? What João just said, I think, is really important. We've spent 15 months now engaged in formal consultation. But before that, prenatal, in fact, probably pre-conceptual, we were involved in informal consultations, optioneering, involving people both at the level of capacity development and at the level of service delivery to try to make sure that the ground was prepared for the formal process. Now, that having been said, most of the focus is inevitably in the public domain on the formal process, and how have we approached it? We have approached it in a very specific way, in effect as a campaign, somewhere between a political campaign and a marketing campaign, in the sense that we are seeking a specific commercial outcome, the specific commercial outcome being the grant of planning consent which will allow us to develop our business. And in order to deliver that, a specific behavioural change. And the behavioural change I'm looking for, and this is perhaps where I might differ slightly from other people on this panel, is either at the stretch level, the support for this project at a broad level, a broad public level, or at a more pragmatic level, the tolerance of this project. I have to sort of nail my colours to the mast and say that seeking absolute public support for this is a heroic endeavour, but probably doomed to complete failure. So I'm more pragmatic than that. What I want is a level of support, and ideally a level of support, but certainly acceptance. Now, doing that, we deployed all of the tools that you will be familiar with from any marketing campaign. Job one, what's the audience? And that is an absolutely critical question, because there are plenty of people in the UK who will want to argue that the audience is national government. This is a big project. Airports are very high profile. They are politically toxic. Forgive me for saying so, but I think it's still true to a large extent. Confessing that you run an airport at a dinner party on Saturday night is not too dissimilar to saying that your favourite activity is clubbing baby seals to death. You know, it is not a popular subject. And therefore there are people who wish to say that this is environmentally disastrous on any level and therefore needs to be dealt with nationally. And therefore your audience, Mr Jones, and your colleagues ought to be national government. And we did not accept that argument. We didn't accept that argument for two reasons. One, it becomes an unmanageable debate at that level. But secondly, there are actually regulations in the UK as to what kind of projects are dealt with by national government, and this is, as I say, a big project, but it's not a huge one, and therefore it falls beneath that threshold. But job one, like it is in any marketing campaign, any campaign, identify the audience. Job two, segment the audience. This is a critical question, because it brings with it all kinds of supplementary questions like, how are you going to communicate with those different segments? The principal centre of population relative to the airport is the town of Luton. It's not an enormous town, 200,000 people, but there are 122 different languages spoken in that town. The segmentation question brings with it the marketing channel question, and that brings with it, are you going to try and communicate in 122 languages? Obviously you can't, so you have to be very pragmatic about that. More difficult than that is, how do you message? The development of an airport, self-evidently I guess, is a highly complex question. It brings with it all kinds of environmental questions, it brings with it all kinds of economic questions, it just brings with it all kinds of practical questions about road access and the impact on train capacity, for example. And so creating messages that are compelling but not oversimplified is an absolutely key component of the way we approach this. And it's particularly difficult because, unlike most marketing campaigns, although probably quite like many political campaigns, you know that there is going to be a vociferous, perhaps small, but nonetheless vociferous, well-organised and absolutely antithetical set of competitors. And those competitors are not, this is not like selling coffee. They are not going to say, well, your coffee may make you irresistibly attractive to women, but mine will make you live longer. They are going to say, don't buy coffee. So you are talking about a sort of category level of competition rather than a brand level of competition, and therefore the messaging that you develop has to take that into account. And therefore that whole approach to the marketing piece and the messaging piece requires enormously careful thought. It requires enormously careful thought about delivery as well. If we segment, for example, by geography, we have one set of people who are urban, have access, for example, to broadband, to good quality broadband. But we also have a segment that is very rural, that is largely elderly, that has some access to broadband, but probably doesn't use it. So we have all kinds of questions about marketing channels, about communication channels that we need to address, and to address not only in an abstract sense, but with a finite amount of money to spend and a finite amount of time. And therefore we had to try to make pragmatic decisions about the most effective use of resource, rather than just take a very broad brush or indeed an infinite time and an infinite resource-based approach. Excuse me. So all of that marketing campaign stuff having been taken into account, where did we get to? Well, we got to a 65% level of support for the campaign. And in the UK, to generate 65% support, not 65% tolerance, but active support, is extraordinarily difficult. And how did we achieve that? We did not achieve it primarily by seeking to persuade everybody. We knew that we couldn't. There are those people who hold views honourably, which are diametrically opposed to my own and are completely antithetical to my own, and those are the business that I represent. We will never persuade them, and we will be foolish to try to persuade them. Instead, we've built what was used in a completely different context to be described as a coalition of the willing. And we did have our Costa Rican moments as well, when some people were in that coalition and then decided that they didn't want to be in that coalition. I think that the critical thing to remember, as Jar said, is that there are people, there are small interest groups who will represent themselves as being absolutely representative of a huge constituency of opinion. They probably are not, but nonetheless they will represent themselves that way. It is incumbent upon me as a practitioner to make sure that the views of those people who support the project are equally clearly heard. So trade unions, for example, who have a huge interest in employment levels. Local businesses who have a clear interest in the induced economic effects of the airport. Employees who want security of tenure. The local politicians and indeed regional politicians who want the GDP, the gross value added benefit for the region, which is in the region of £1 billion a year, to come through. All of those people can be pulled together into a coalition of the willing. That's how we approach this, and that's how we got, well, so far, so good.
Thank you, Glyn. That was very interesting. But I found it rather tantalising because you described a marketing campaign or a political campaign, a combination of the two, and at one moment you titillated us by mentioning the broadband, but I never quite understood how you delivered these messages. I mean, what is the new technology of persuasion? I mean, I think of an airport maybe having, public meetings, inviting people to the town hall, but I suspect that is now very old-fashioned. What is the new technology of this communication?
We ran 2 phases of master planning communication, and you're absolutely right. In the first one, we used the modern technologies. We did not focus on face-to-face meetings. We wanted to use the power of the internet, and indeed the power of social media as well, which is absolutely not to be underestimated, almost impossible to control, but not to be underestimated. What we found was that we had excluded important constituencies. They might not have been important constituencies in terms of their size, or indeed even in terms of their persuasiveness in either way, either for or against the case. But they were democratically important constituencies. So when we ran the exercise the second time, we continued to use the digital basis of communication that we started with, but we added, you're right, the old-fashioned mechanism, a roadshow of events, not in central locations, because the impact of the airport in environmental terms is geographically quite large. I'm not sure I'd accept necessarily that it's quite as large in qualitative terms as some of our opponents would like to argue, although there is a reality to that. So in order to make sure that we communicated in the right way, we had, as I said, to segment the audience. And so, for example, we had small rural communities, in many cases with quite an aged demographic, whose preferred mechanism was either the local newspaper, and when I say local, I mean micro-local, the newspaper for their village, or they, most of all, preferred us to pitch up individually, that means me and the board of directors, to stand there, to take them through the proposals, to answer their questions as well as we could, to accept their criticisms, because there were many criticisms, and to accept their constructive contributions to the debate. Now, on that subject, Michael, if I can just move on to that, because I think that's quite an interesting and important question that's been raised by a few people. How much does the proposal get changed as a consequence of the consultation? Well, the answer to that is it did, in my case, it did get changed. For example, we dealt with night noise from aircraft in different ways as a result of both phases of consultation. But most of the change work, I think, has to be done a priori. It has to be done at the preconceptual or certainly at the prenatal stage. Otherwise, you find yourself in an endless sequence of iterations which are both expensive and time-consuming and actually sort of energy-draining at one level. So the consultation created a challenge to us. It was dealt with, but most of that challenge had been dealt with before we actually got to the formal stage of consultation.
Very good. We are slightly more than halfway through this session, and at any stage now, I'd be very happy to take contributions from the audience. At any time, feel free to raise your hand. This is very good. We already have some contributions to the audience. So I recognise the gentleman at the back and the gentleman at the front here. And would you very kindly give us your name?
I'm Michael Replogel with the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy in Washington, D.C. One of the key challenges to bring communities and transport users on board for transportation projects is access to information. In some cases, just basic information about what the characteristics and impacts of projects will be before they're actually out there and the bulldozers are working away. And in developing countries, that information is often simply not available to affected communities or not available in a timely way. There are moves in the right direction. I think the multilateral development banks, the 8 largest ones, took a $175 billion pledge at Rio Plus 20 for more sustainable transport over the next decade, with annual reporting and monitoring as part of that to look at how progress is being made on delivering more sustainable transport. And that effort depends on providing effective indicators of how sustainable different projects are, how they're contributing individually and collectively as a portfolio towards goals on sustainable transport. The Asian Development Bank has made some, I think, very positive advances in developing a sustainable transport appraisal rating, STAR, approach to looking at the primary drivers of sustainable transport indicators and outcomes. And that's being discussed by the other development banks. I'm wondering if members of the panel might comment on how that kind of framework, if adopted commonly by multilateral development banks, might help to drive more effective public engagement, consultation, and support for investments in transport, particularly for more sustainable transport in the developing world, and how that might also help to drive a push within member developing countries that are engaging with development banks to shape their own portfolio of transport investments in a more sustainable direction that helps bring more users and communities on board.
Who would like to go first on that? Yeah, Joel?
Somehow I'm the only multilateral development bank or bank represented here. Actually, at the EIB, we are moving in that direction, similar to other banks, the Asian Development Bank. We have a system now that in place in all the projects that we appraised. We select a number of indicators on different areas of that affect the project. And these are part of our cycle, project cycle. And after the project is completed, depending on the number of years after completion, we will go again to visit the project after the normal completion reports, etc., with the same set of indicators and see what we have appraised 3 or 4 years earlier, if they matched our expectations or not, what went wrong or what went right. And we have done this exercise already in some projects, and now it becomes a standard procedure inside the bank when we appraise our projects, either inside the EU or outside the EU. I hope this answered your question. But yes, indeed, the banks are working on this direction, at least our bank. And we know that by contacts we have with other banks, they are also doing similar exercises. Having a similar set of indicators, that's another level. I think we are also looking into this area. In some particular areas, for example, in road safety, where I'm working in the working group with the different 8 MDBs, we are setting up common indicators to assess the road safety impacts, negative and positive, of the projects that we embark upon.
Andreas.
Bei allen Modellen, die
Andreas. Well, all models which are launched worldwide, all model-based indicators, be it with regard to sustainability, be it with regard to approaches or projects where we kind of pool ideas also within the ITF. We try to make sure that nobody needs to reinvent the wheel, and we try to compare notes and learn from each other, and I think that's a good thing. Now, just to get back to your question, do you think citizens are interested in knowing what a World Bank, what kind of indicator system is employed by the World Bank as somebody who's 3,000 kilometers away? I think people are interested in their local project on the ground. I think hardly anyone is interested in the sustainability blueprint or approach of the UNESCO. I don't think that. Personally, I'm also a practitioner. I'm a field worker. I have to speak to citizens at a public consultation and need to justify certain ring roads, etc., and talk about the pros and cons. And citizens are really not interested in things going on in an ITF scientist speaking on some platform in order to implement best practice implementation campaigns. Maybe I'm a bit salt of the earth. I mean, I know what's going on. I mean, for instance, third runway in Munich. I mean, 100 millions in a major conurbation fund. This is a project where noise plays a role, resettlement campaigning, public consultation. People did all their homework. What's the impact? What's the bottom line? You got the top managers who do shuttle diplomacy worldwide, leaving Munich airports 2-3 times a week, and they didn't manage to go to the public consultation round. I mean, that was a democratic choice. It was just a few people who were creating a lot of noise and who went to that public consultation, and they turned the third runway in Munich down. And this is what we need to talk about. We need to make sure that infrastructure implementation gets a positive view again, positive public image, that economic development has something to do with infrastructure. Transport policy is economic policy in practice at work, and we need to convince citizens of this. I mean, all of this is a challenging issue, but we need to cover the whole picture. We need to make sure that we don't use this as a political tool, but that we create a certain pride for the industrial location. This is what was described a minute ago. An airport nowadays, is no longer being implemented because airports need to be implemented or planned. But an airport needs to be embraced by the region because it's about pride, it's about emotional aspects, and this way you can really get people on board.
Must have been a pretty good question because it provoked a very robust response. Holger, yes, what's your response?
Like to bring the question together what we heard so far, and I think this is one of the big challenges we're having. We have this real commitment and a bank commitment of $175 billion US, and we have the local needs of the city and the decision on the right infrastructure. And I think that's important, how we can better align that. And here one of the challenges already for the banks is in fact, the government are asking for the loan. The government has also their vision of what infrastructure is needed. So here, working together between the banks and the national government on what is an appropriate, good, sustainable infrastructure in the future, and the Asian Development Bank as one example, also giving some guidance in a direction. But it's still also on the government to decide, and then also for the government to bring that also to the citizens. And we have here with ProTram a good initiative saying, well, we have to invest. And here the question is, back to our topic on the public consultation, what level we need, and that would be also interesting to compare the strong legislative-driven processes we're having in Europe and the more voluntary in Mexico and others. And what are the lessons learned? What is needed in the future to improve the quality of projects through consultation, but also not going too far? And I think that's often the dialogue we don't have with these countries, and also where more international advice from the banks, but also from the different countries would be really helpful. And that's also what is often missing. And I think there are lots of lessons to learn out of England, out of Germany. What is the right level? And if we find the right balance, then we can come also to better projects and better acceptance also of these projects.
We've got quite a high level of participation from the audience. I'm going to move on. You're going to be the first, sir. Have you got a microphone already? Microphone here. Then I've clocked you as well, and we've got one over there as well, haven't we? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Ole Thorsen from the International Federation of Pedestrians. First of all, I would say I have participated in several consultation or public consultations in Catalonia, especially now, the last one, with a great high-speed train station in Barcelona, where all the neighbors, I'm assessor for the neighbors, to talk with the, let's say, constructors, the administrations. And it's going fairly good, slowly, righto, but we get in some appointments, some views from the, let's say, from the citizens and the users. Talking about pedestrians, I would like you here to just make a little memory of how many times you have thought that terminals, airports, train stations and so was not made for the passengers or for pedestrians. It was made for technical reasons, for trains or for planes or for anything else. And you, as human beings, was not good attended. How is that about? It is that many of my colleagues, technicians, are knowing about technical solutions, but not about human solutions, not about what is a pedestrian, what does he need in a great project. You can take a by road. There you will find that, it's just going by. It's not no permeability. And that's just one of the things. Solve the permeability and you make it support. So what I would like to say that, of course, pedestrians are very badly organized around the world. Many countries doesn't even have a group working for the pedestrians. But what we can ask you first is try to find some people that may have some idea of what a pedestrian needs and put them in the project.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, I rather agree that with the questioner that pedestrians perhaps are not considered enough. Would anyone like to react to that? Oh, very, very good. Carlos.
Let me put you another example that applies perfectly. We constructed a suburban railroad in Mexico, and it was designed by technicians on the right-of-way of the old railroads, freight railroads, and it was projected to move about 300,000 passengers per day. It's moving half. And why? Because the physical design was designed from the track, not from the city. So the access to the stations was not designed for the people, was designed for the train to stop there where they found the terrain to expropriate, and it was not linked with the feeder physical roads. And what's happening now is that the feeder buses that enter to the stations, they carry just 30% of the users. The other 70% arrive to the station walking. They come from the surroundings of the city, or they come with the bus lines that pass through about 2 or 3 blocks near the stations, and then they walk. And what's happening is that the accessibility to the station is very, very poor. So what's happening is exactly what is not. You are not designing integrally the project, considering that finally your users will be arriving mainly walking.
And Glyn, pedestrians get lots of exercise in airports, in my experience.
Let me disagree with what the gentleman has said, Michael, for 3 reasons. In the UK, and I really can only speak with any authority about the UK, most airports make their money from their passengers. They don't make it from their airlines. And therefore, in the design of an airport, absolutely meter-by-meter attention has to be given to people on foot, because that's what passengers are at that stage. And certainly in the redesign and the redevelopment of the airport that I'm responsible for, that has absolutely been the case. So there is a very strong commercial motivator. The second motivator is safety. At my airport, there was a fatality on a road 4 years ago. That has caused, if it hadn't caused it before, an even greater emphasis on the safety and the utility for pedestrians, to the extent that in the new development there is complete segregation, 100% segregation of pedestrians and moving vehicles. And the third reason is the necessity to deal with reduced mobility. Many passengers have reduced mobility for a variety of reasons, which is complicated at my airport by topography. And so that driver of dealing with an important minority means that we just don't have the luxury of designing for the airplanes. I mean, frankly, designing it for the airplanes is the easy bit, because that's highly regulated. There are all kinds of engineering challenges, and that's fine. They're not design challenges. Those are very highly regulated. The real challenge is on how you develop the airport for the passenger, i.e. for the pedestrian.
Very good. Could we have the microphone to that gentleman, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Ko Sakamoto from the Asian Development Bank. I would like to thank Mr. Reprogel earlier for raising this point on the work that we're doing with the Sustainable Transport Appraisal Framework. I just wanted to clarify for the audience, and also in relation to the basic thesis of today, that what we do as a development bank is very much a tiny part of the overall investments needed in our region. Our World Bank colleagues yesterday highlighted the fact that even despite the $175 billion that we have available in our hands, this is about 3% of the total transport needs of developing countries. And therefore, it falls upon people like us, in our view, to try to, in a way, leverage change through the investments that we make. This appraisal framework is very heavily modeled on the UK model on new approaches to transport appraisal. And so we are trying to learn from such good examples. And then, first of all, for us, ourselves as a bank, to appraise our projects in a more sustainable manner, but also use these tools to consult with our developing member countries, and by extension to those people who we serve ultimately, on what kinds of projects are, in the end, the most sustainable. So I just wanted to put that into context. Thank you.
May I ask you, while you've got the microphone, as well as taking money to developing countries, do you also take models of consultation? Is that part of your business?
Absolutely. Asian Development Bank, and I'm sure EIB colleagues will also portray the same picture. We have very rigorous ways of public consultation. This is mandated in our policies. And of course, through this, we hope that we can provide our member countries with good models of engaging with the public. But we also realize that we still need a lot more than just these standard policies. I think this appraisal framework that we're developing is one step further towards that.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I take the next questioner, who I know is waiting there, let me just raise this issue with the panel, if I may, and quite briefly, because we're beginning to run out of time. What's kind of emerging during this discussion is that standards are more and more becoming globalized. And as I understand the conversation, the drift of the standards is upwards. So very high specifications of public consultation. But as Andreas reminded us a moment ago, we do actually want to get projects built. And I'm just wondering whether in this this rush to virtue, this rush to do things as well as we possibly can, as inclusively as we can, is there a danger that the globalization of the standard, the movement of standards ever upwards across the world, is actually going to slow down transport projects in ways that will disadvantage very large populations? I mean, Andreas, would you like to react to that thought?
Well, I think, yes, to a certain extent, you're right. So I'm not arguing that public consultation, public hearings, and planning processes, etc., take place in close consultation with the citizens. But having said this, I think the cost is that it's more time-consuming, and this will slow down the progress. Having said that, the individual projects also become more costly for governments, for public coffers. Let me give you an example. 20 years ago, that's at least the arithmetics I have in mind, 20 years ago, for one taxpayer's euro, I got 80% road built. So 20% were the overheads. So compensation, land, environmental, noise protection, whatever. Nowadays, for €1, the benefit is probably 50% in terms of roads. Maybe this is just a very broad brush picture I'm painting, but this is just in a ballpark figure. 50% noise abatement, 20% noise abatement, etc. Then public consultation compromises which need to be funded. And at the end of the day, our taxpayers' money is our money. Very often when I go to a public consultation and when citizens are very critical and they're calling for tunnels, for noise protection walls, and the best thing is if the motorway goes underground, then I said, look guys, at the end of the day it's up to you too, because it's also your tax money. We also need to talk about projects which can see the light of the day, which are realistic. We have to comply with budget legislation. If I look at the cost-benefit analysis, I mean, if I get less benefits and more costs, then sooner or later major infrastructure projects, corridors, which are important for the European development, will become virtually financially unfeasible, and this faces us with a major problem. At national interfaces, we get bottlenecks, and it won't be able to overcome these congestions and bottlenecks for decades on end, and you get trucks and congestion of trucks and trains, whatever. I spoke to the Turkish colleague, and he had problems in crossing the Alps because Austria just puts a cap on transit, on lorry transit. Why? Well, the Austrian citizens say, well, too much noise, too much pollution, too much CO2. We need to put a cap on that. Okay, yes, but the thing is, the German automotive manufacturing industry needs windshields from Turkey. We need the cargo for our own economy, and this is the kind of conflict, trade-off we're faced with.
Great. That provoked a reaction. Very good. Let's go to that questioner there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to introduce myself as part of the Coalition of the Willing. I represent the European Cyclist Federation. We are an umbrella organization organizing, you can say, the National Bicycle User Association in Europe and abroad. I think that 30, 40 years ago, the bicycle user movement was doing a lot of fights. Nowadays, I think most of our organizations are part of the Coalition of the Willing, because we go for quality of life. We need a modern, sustainable mobility system, and we know that walking, cycling, public transport, cars, trains, everything has to be a part of this mobility system. My concern is a little bit that organizing the impact of user associations is threatened by, you can say, the different levels of power and professionality. Nowadays we work worldwide. We try to do exchange of best practice about what we know about cycling, etc., and what we know about organizing bicycle user organizations worldwide. But I think that in these public consultations on huge projects, there is a lack of professionality worldwide from our community and a lack of power to bring in what we know. What we can offer in these kind of processes, I absolutely believe that our involvement avoids wrong investments in how to connect the whole system to cycling and to walking, etc. So our experience is that changing huge projects after 10 years to bring in more walking and more cycling that people want can be avoided by taking us in time at the beginning of the project. So I like very much the statement of Mr. Jones about his project, where he said that you can say planning ahead of what you can expect from the people can avoid a lot of wrong investments. But my concern is, and this is my question to the panel, how could we organize a higher standard and professionality of user organizations, transport user organizations worldwide to give them the right impact?
Would any panel member like to react to that? And Holger, while you are reacting, because you talked to us earlier about China, a country which traditionally has had hundreds of millions of cyclists, you might just give us a comment on what's happening to cycling in China. Is it in decline? Is the cyclist respected? Is the cyclist built into plans? How's it working?
I think that's really interesting to see when it comes to cycling or walking, the development we had in the last 20 years in Europe. From a decline also on walking, a decline also in cycling, and suddenly recognize that non-motorized transport is, particularly in cities, a vital part also of accessibility. So we see this huge program in Germany, in UK. It really, every time I'm coming now to London, really the picture changed, partly also because of the infrastructure and also the different office. China currently is in a phase on high economic growth, on going almost trying to go through the same pathway as Europe. Or we need more space for cars. We have to put the cyclists and pedestrians aside. But then suddenly already recognize, like in Beijing, completely stuck in congestion. So the recognition that there is a need for a solid mix, and some cities already recognize, well, we have to go in a different way. The city of Hangzhou started 2 years ago a bicycle sharing scheme with 70,000 bikes. So here, saying we are also the country of the bike, and it has also a space. So we see, recognizing we can't just follow for a long time the European pathway, or even more the American pathway, focus just on the automobile, and recognizing we're stuck in congestion. We need, in fact, also that change. So we can also observe some shifts. I'd like to go briefly back on what we heard from the cycling, from the pedestrian, and bring that back to the panel. What we have in Europe here a lot of experience how to bring in the interest from cyclists, from pedestrian, sometimes probably even too far. But I think it would be important to look into how can we learn now these lessons. One example now, in Brazil, there's a new mobility law. 1,667 cities now have to come up with a mobility plan. And no city currently know how to do that. So here, having the knowledge out of Europe on mobility plans, and also a certain level of consultation. How can we bring this knowledge and providing also the right level, and providing then also the opportunity, saying yes, it helps to improve the project also to really understand the accessibilities for pedestrians and cyclists. So again, here the banks play a role, but I think also countries where the knowledge is, like Germany, like England, can play a larger role in sharing also this knowledge as well as also the technology.
Is our questioner still there? I was going to ask him whether he would influence cyclists in the United Kingdom to respect red lights on one-way streets. Well, suddenly we've got a lot of questioners. Let's take these two questions together, or these 2 points together, and we'll respond to them. Yes?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Maël Martini. I'm working for the GIZ the German Development Agency. And I'm glad Mr. Dachmann mentioned Brazil, because my question is precisely using the example of Brazil. Actually, at the moment, in this, like the main theme of this forum is funding transport, and I think mega events such as World Cups or Olympics, precisely in Rio de Janeiro 2014 and 16, might be a huge opportunity for the city itself to renovate, build new transportation systems for people. Problem is the timeline is very short, and people are complaining that actually they are not consulted at all. Sometimes they were just evicted and without any compensation or few compensation. So my question would be the following: are such mega events compatible with like this people's participation to renovate the city and to improve the transport system, and is it sustainable on the long-term view? Because like when you buy a new BRT, it's still there after the event. Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting question about the Olympics, and it reminds me that, of course, similar concerns were raised at the time of the Beijing Olympics as to whether there had been sufficient consultation. Because we're running short of time, we'll keep your question in mind, but we're going to hear from this lady as well. Please, microphone here. Lady in whitish colour. And then we'll take these two questions together.
Thank you. Anne Fry from the UK. We've talked a lot about consultation before implementation. I just wanted to touch briefly on consultation after implementation, which is particularly relevant to city-level development such as shared space for pedestrians and cyclists and motorists, which is happening a great deal in Europe. In almost every case, there is consultation, but it's in the form of on-street surveys. So you talk to the people who are out there happily using the new system. There is no attempt to reach what I would call the displaced people, predominantly probably older people, people with disabilities, who are no longer comfortable to use the streets. And I would welcome the panel's view on how you make sure that after implementation you are getting feedback, not just from those who think it's fabulous, but from those who've just quietly taken themselves away because they can no longer use that facility. Thank you.
Excellent. So we've got two questions really from kind of opposite ends. One is the kind of global mega project and its consequences and its sustainability and its impact on populations. And the other is maybe at the urban level, what do we do to make sure that the project has worked out as we hoped that it would? Who would like to go with that? Oh, nobody very keen to do that. Yeah, Glenn, go on.
I'll have a go at the first one. Not talking about the Olympics, but talking about the impact of the development of an airport on a region is absolutely fundamental. We will deal with the unemployment issue in the town that supports the airport. There are roughly 5,000 people unemployed in Luton, and that is the number of jobs that will be created by the scheme, and we'll add, as I said earlier, roughly £1 billion in GVA each year. So I hear people debate the minutiae of impact. I don't hear anyone debate, because if you get two economists, a bit like two lawyers really, you get two answers and two bills. I don't hear anybody debate the principle of transport and infrastructure developing really significant economic effects, particularly regionally, but I guess nationally as well. In terms of the question on do you evaluate post hoc, airports, I guess, are a slightly unique case, certainly in the UK, in that they are above a very small size level, required to run a consultative committee. And that consultative committee, I mean, I've sat on, 3 now, I think. They tend to be made up of local people, or representatives of local people, and representatives of local interest groups. And so we're constantly being scrutinised in terms of not only the impact of development, but the impact of activity at the local level. Now, the quality of that scrutiny is a function of the quality of the people involved in it. And we can't do anything very much about that. But there is at least a statutory framework for dealing with that at the airport level in the UK.
Very good. Now, Holger, did you want to say anything? On the Olympics, I must say, I have toured former Olympic sites around the world, and some of them are very, very sad places, tumbleweed blowing in the wind in absolutely deserted facilities. I hope I don't tread on too many toes if I mention Athens, Sydney, and even Barcelona. They can be pretty depressing places. Holger.
I had, in fact, in 2012, the pleasure also to visit London, and I think it was a tremendous games. And I think there were a lot of lessons from London, which already was in the thinking of Rio were learned in terms of you should not plan just for the Olympics and run the Olympics, but really run for after the Olympics and look also into the infrastructure which is really needed. And that's I think a lesson also Rio really took into account when it came. They're building now 150 kilometers of bus rapid transit, not just serving really the Olympics, but serving the people and using the opportunity of the Olympic and the huge investment, which is just part also of a larger country investment plan. I think here we come back to the challenge again in terms of how far consultation can go, and at least what I see in Rio, that there was information. There was information about the plans based on a former consultation, particularly on experts and interest group, what are the right infrastructure and what needs to be done. So here I can see also in Rio that we have some complaints, but this infrastructure is really built also for the future and has also some level of information. But here again, one question also in the future, how much can we even more learn from London and from other places in terms of how to bring in the public a little bit more to and still get it done like London has done.
I was a little bit of an Olympics skeptic in London, but I will say this, it was largely a transport project, and the Olympic site, the main Olympic site, is now served by about 10 railway lines. So there is an enduring infrastructure legacy in a place which before was pretty poorly connected. We're going to close in 2 minutes' time. Andreas is going to have the last word.
Ich glaube, wir haben...
I think we have seen in this discussion here that we share a joint objective, funding it, and also implementing transport infrastructure projects. And the ITF provides a wonderful opportunity. It is an exchange of information here, who's doing what in a good way and what can we learn from other projects. But also on public consultation here, we must not make the mistake and make public consultation a scientific expertise so that the scientists discuss among themselves how to run a public consultation. I think citizens' participation means have participation of the citizen and not of the scientists here. And all these nice subjects here for the connoisseurs here, sustainability, environmental protection. We have to watch out that this continues to be practical here. Now, we have this toolkit now that we want to test now in Germany, and we, as politicians, will need to learn a lot from that. But don't now not just get lost on a high level here and charge it up with expertise and scientists, etc., and cost a lot of money to taxpayers' money. So let's do genuine citizen participation. That would be my appeal.
I'd like to thank at this session particularly the audience. You've been very interactive with the panel. Thank you very much for your questions and points. Could I thank very much the interpreters for supplying us with such a very good service. And then could I thank our panel, João, Holger, Glyn, Carlos, Andreas. Let's hear a round of applause for the panel, please. Thank you.